So this is the next part in a series discussing what I do when I stand up a new environment. By no means is this an exhaustive list. It's things I do that I personally like or that I find apply to whatever workload or type of database I'm putting in place. In our last episode, we talked about ease of use. These were things that I did that either allowed me to get to information quickly or I wanted things automatically set up and going. In this next phase, this episode, we're going to be talking about configuration I do at the DB2 environment or instance level. These are things that I set in that I think are universal anytime I get into a new box. There are really two things that I attack here, and again, this is the 40,000 foot view at the DB2 or instance level. I play with the db2 set command to set various levels of parallelism when I'm working with disks, and I set various authorities to make redirected restores easier. At the instance level, I will go in and play with my error log location so I don't run the risk of filling up a file system that's critical. I turn on various switches to gather information when I need to analyze data later. I turn off the DB2 health monitor, which sounds a little counterintuitive. I change the authority levels to allow an ID to come in and do some generic monitoring, and I end up shutting off the auto instance start so I can have granular control of when that happens. So these aren't that complicated, but there are a few to show. So let's go ahead and go to the command line and I can show you how this is done. Do you remember the .profile? It was the item that allowed you to set different environmental variables for a user. This is how I wanted my environment to look and act every time I logged in. Well, there's something similar in DB2, but it's setting at an environment level. It's always on, and that's called DB2 set. It will set any DB2 environmental variables and apply it either globally or at an instance level. I almost didn't cover it here because these settings are so workload specific. What you have for a warehouse will be different than what you would have for a tool that would be different than for transaction processing. But there are one or two that I always turn on immediately, and they seem to be fairly universal. So DB2 set's easy to use. The command is actually DB2 set. And the -all flag will show you what your current settings are. Usually it's pretty basic. And over here on the side you will see an I or a G. And this will signal whether it's being applied at the instance level or globally. One thing I want to point out is this db2com TCP IP. Upon instance creation, I find this is not always there. And then all of a sudden I have a hard time starting and stopping things communicating to databases. And I realize it's because this is not set. So right off the bat, make sure it's there. If you want to set something, it's very easy. It's db2 set, then the parameter and a value. So the first one I'm going to do has to do with parallelism. This is how DB2 talks to the backend disks and how it's going to handle parallelism and its workload. It used to be this was a number you would calculate and try to dial in, but most people found over time setting it to splat or setting it to a number could really give you different results. So most people set it to splat and allow DB2 to figure out how to do its parallelism. The next item I do has to do with authorities, and it's the restore grant admin authorities parameter. This is something that is relatively new, happened I'm guessing 9.7 or early 10s, and it has to do with how the instance has access or authority to the database. More specifically, when you're doing things like redirected restores, there are certain scenarios that you would take a backup, restore it on another box via redirected restore, but then all of a sudden that instance ID doesn't have access to the database any longer. This alleviates that. Again, it's pretty easy to set. It's db2 set, the parameter and its value. Now, I've set two different things. Let's make sure it's in effect. There we go. There's the grant admin authority set at the instance level. And here's DB2 parallel IO set at the instance level. And it's important to note here that this doesn't require you to bounce the instance or a database or turn things off or on. It automatically takes effect. So what if I want to turn one of these off? Let's say I don't want that grant admin authorities value there. Well, it's easy. Set it to nothing. And I point that out because sometimes people get hung up on if it's supposed to be null or off, or it doesn't matter. Here, just set it to nothing. And once you're done, you'll see it's gone. So that's DB2 set. Like I said, it's pretty easy. I've shown you how to look at what's there, how to turn something on, and how to turn something off. But this is also going to be really workload specific, and you'll figure out what you need over time. So we've talked quite a bit about setting various environment variables, right? And we've set it up at the user level, we've set it up at the software level with DB2 set. That applies to anything, every instance, every database. But the two we haven't covered is configuring at the instance level and the database level. Now doing it at the instance level is pretty easy. And the way to check what's currently set is db2 get DBM CFG. Now there's a lot in here. I'm going to start at the top. These are all things that you will set to best practices or based off of things your tool will tell you that you need. But there are some universal things that I always change in here, and let me point them out. One of the first things I always change is the diag path. This is where your error log is going to go. Right now it's currently dumping into the instance home directory. So if it went and grew unchecked, it could actually impact you in the long run. The next thing I try to address is the database monitor switches. These are metrics that DB2 watches to help give you information or feedback when you're looking at SQL or locks or capturing information. Right now the default is off. We actually want them to all be on. Now what may not make sense is this health monitor is something I turn off. The reason being is it seems to be a CPU hog or can easily float to the top process unintentionally. So I prefer to leave the monitor switches on, collect the information so I can go look at it, but don't worry about the health monitor monitoring it. The next thing I take a look at and usually automatically set will be the sysmon group. The sysmon group has some basic authorities to monitor the database. I always set this because whether it's Zabbix or Dynatrace or my own scripts or whatever, I usually have an ID coming in here to monitor. So I will go ahead and set that up. The other thing that's not easily listed here and is actually a separate command is shutting off the auto instance start. If for some reason you bounced your database, bounced your server, and you come back on the line, I want to be able to control when the instance activates and when it doesn't. So let me show you how to set this. Now it's pretty easy. I'm going to show you how to do this once on a single command, and then I will show you a quick way to do it because I developed some scripts for you to use. But I want you to be able to see the before and after picture. To make a change, let's say I want to change my default mon buffer pool. These are one of the ones I wanted to turn on, right? Let me cut and paste the variable I want from my show notes. So to make the update, it's db2 update DBM CFG using the variable you want, what you want it to set to, and immediate. If it can immediately set it, it will. However, it's a little bit misleading. Let me show you what I mean. If I, as I am now, just do db2 get DBM CFG. Now, don't get thrown off when I type more. I just don't want it scrolling off screen. If I go and look at the buffer pool setting, it's currently set to on. Looks like I'm done, right? Well, let's take a look at something else. Let me attach to the instance. You can think of this almost as a connect statement, but I'm connecting at the instance level. Now, db2 get DBM CFG show detail. Show detail is very interesting. Watch what happens. It shows me the current value and the value that it will eventually go to. Well, here's the buffer pool that I changed. I want to be able to watch that metric. But notice the current value is off. It's not on yet. Why? That's because I need to turn the instance on and off before it takes effect. I always come through and attach and take a look if it actually came on or not. Or I make the assumption that it's not there yet and go ahead and just bounce. So let me detach. And I'm going to stop the instance and start it. I'm going to attach to the instance again, and then I'm going to do show detail. Here we go. Default mon buffer pool. Now current value is on, delayed value is on. So as you make changes, make sure to always go back and double check to make sure these match, and that you don't have a value out there that is being applied after you bounce your instance. So let me show you something else. Alright guys, I'm going to show you a cheat that I use as I'm filming for you. These are my episode notes. Everything that I talked to you about doing is here. If I want to do the monitoring switches, I have to address every one of these. If I want to turn off the health monitor, this is what I start with. These are all the commands I have to do. Now for the sake of time, I'm not going to type all of these in, but I will show you this. I developed some scripts for you that I'll have on my GitHub repository. One of them is the update DBM preferences. Now I need to change the permission levels, but it's pretty self-explanatory. You're gonna have to go in and change things like what value you may want for a file system or the database name. However, if I just hit go, first thing it does, it says stop, you're about to screw things up. Are you really sure you want to do this? If you say yes and go, it's going to go ahead and make all of these changes for you, as well as recycle the environment. Now use your brain, guys, when you're taking a look at this. This is meant to be something for you to develop on. So you have to go through here, and you're going to end up changing what sysmon group you want, what db2 diag directory you want, what's the instance ID you're dealing with. And it's meant as a starting place for you to go in and add your own. You can easily throw in these update DBM CFGs into this script, run it, and it'll make those changes for you every time. The last thing that I mentioned very briefly but haven't done yet is shutting off the auto instance start. If this is on when your server recycles and DB2 comes back, it will automatically try to start your instance for you. I never want that. I always turn off the ability for the auto start of the instance or the auto start of the database. I want granular control of that. For me to be able to turn it off, I don't update a DBM CFG, but I do a db2 iauto -off and the instance name. Done. Now the reason I was doing it in this section is because you can actually see if it's on or off in the database manager configuration. Well, that's it for the instance level. Next, we're going to be talking a little bit about control at the database level.